Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
Our military mission in Afghanistan will conclude on August 31st. The drawdown is proceeding in a secure and orderly way, prioritizing the safety of our troops as they depart.
A new timeline for the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. What's next for our troops in the region as the Taliban gains ground? Plus, no fans in the stands. A state of emergency in Tokyo, forcing spectators to skip the Olympic Games. And an NBC News exclusive, 8 of Bill Cosby's accusers speaking out a week after Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned his conviction.
Does it feel like you're being re-victimized?
Well, of course it does. We are re-victimized time and time again throughout the whole judicial process.
We start today with President Biden's address on Afghanistan. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is here, along with NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Cubey. Monica, first to you. President Biden saying the military operation will end August 31st now. What else did he say about the pace of bringing troops home and the transition of power?
The president's own words, Allison, he said speed is safety. So once he announced this withdrawal plan back in April, he said he then wanted the Pentagon to work quite swiftly, and that's why you already have about 90% of this drawdown complete at this point, even though it won't be fully done until the end of August. So the president here detailing a little bit more on the timeline, some of which we knew, and some of which he's saying, of course, because he wants to do all of this before the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. But the majority of this has already now happened in the rearview mirror. So there are still many questions about what happens next now that the U.S. will be leaving the country. But here's how the president framed and defended his decision on leaving Afghanistan in the coming weeks.
After 20 years, $1 trillion spent training and equipping hundreds of thousands of Afghan national security and defense forces, 2,448 Americans killed, 20,722 more wounded, and untold thousands coming home with unseen trauma to their mental health. I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation of achieving a different outcome.
The president campaigned on ending these very long wars. Specifically, he said, in his view, this was an unwinnable one, and certainly he didn't see any military operation in terms of a future there. There will be a small footprint of troops that does stay behind. But for the president, he really said, Allison, that the U.S. did not go to Afghanistan to nation build, though they, of course, will still work with some of the partners and allies in the region to try to help the Afghan government. But the fact of the matter is the president said he was very comfortable with his decision, and he took a lot of questions on it, which is another sign that he wanted to explain it in more detail.
Yeah, a lot of people shouting questions at him, and he stuck around for many of them. So, Courtney, let me ask you, what is there left to do now? The Pentagon saying more than 90% of U.S. troops and equipment are already out of Afghanistan. So as far as you know, what happens between now and August 31st?
There's really nothing left to do. I mean, there's just to put it simply, there's really nothing left. The vast majority of the troops and the equipment are out. What's left there now is what's going to be the more enduring presence there, and that's going to be several hundred, 600 or so, maybe 650 troops who will be securing the embassy. Somewhere between 250, maybe 350 troops that will be more responsible for securing the airport. Of course, you can't have an embassy without a secure airfield. They need Kabul Airport to stay safe, so embassy staff, diplomatic staff, and other government officials can come and go safely. But they are down to that, plus just a little bit more at this point. Everybody is consolidated onto one base. What does remain, though, so in a word, the majority of this mission is basically over. It is really at like the 26-mile marker of this marathon. What does maintain, though, is an authority to conduct airstrikes. So these airstrikes already would be carried out from aircraft that are not inside Afghanistan, but that authority it's still General Scott Miller, who's been the commander there on the ground for almost 3 years now. It will transition at some point in the near future to General Frank McKenzie. He's the commander of U.S. Central Command. That was announced last week. It will happen sometime later this month. But McKenzie, who will be running the and this enduring presence from Tampa, from U.S. Central Command headquarters in Tampa, he will have that authority to conduct airstrikes. But it's important to point out that none of the assets will be coming from inside country still.
Monica, it's no secret that the situation in Afghanistan is deteriorating. What did the president say about trying to help Afghan translators and the allies there who helped the U.S. over the last 20 years?
There are thousands of Afghan nationals, interpreters, translators, as you mentioned, but also drivers and engineers who really did help the U.S. mission over the last 2 decades. Some of them are able to apply for special immigrant visas, and the president said he was happy that the timeline has been shrunk down significantly in terms of how long it takes to process these applications. And he said already that 1,000 or 2,000 are in the works to be relocated to some third-party countries. Some may even be coming to the United States as well. But the White House says this is really a security risk. They didn't want to get into all of the details because they believe the families are still in danger. And that's the other major outstanding question, because as Courtney has been reporting, so much of this process is complete. What remains is also what happens to some of these partners. And in terms of the relocation and the fears, what happens in this very next timeline, the president and the White House saying they would like to see everybody get on planes by the end of August. But there are so many people to deal with that that's going to be a challenge in and of itself as well.
Courtney, we know the Taliban's gaining ground in Afghanistan and doing it quickly, and they are getting closer to Kabul. How concerned are Pentagon officials about that takeover and a potential civil war?
So they're very concerned about the situation. Like, there's a lot of emphasis right now on the Taliban taking over Kabul. That doesn't even necessarily have to be the most concerning potential here. One of the big problems or issues, the most difficult issues within Afghanistan is the fact that the central government runs Kabul and some of the surrounding areas, but the vast majority of the country, it's very rural, and the central government just doesn't reach it. They don't have the infrastructure. Many people live in a very basic way, in a very impoverished way. And so when you talk about the Taliban taking Kabul, that may not even be like the biggest issue for the Afghan people. If they're taking over these rural areas all over the country, there's some reports that they have as much as 50% of the rural parts of the country under control right now, or at least in contested ways. That is creating this incredible instability in the country. And then that's when this becomes, more of a problem for the U.S. and for allies. That's what we're hearing from military officials who I'm speaking with, is that, if the Taliban's taking over these areas, that may create not only a power vacuum, but it may create a breeding ground for other terror networks to move in. That's what we saw before 9/11. We heard a little bit from President Biden today, and I've been hearing more from officials here about how this isn't just a U.S. government problem. This is something that other nations need to take interest in. The security situation in Afghanistan and also the situation for women and girls. We heard a little bit from Biden today about that. We have it here.
The question of what will be done is going to implicate the entire region as well. There's a number of countries that have a grave concern about what's going to happen in Afghanistan relative to their security. The question is, how much of a threat to the United States of America and to our allies is whatever results in terms of a government or an agreement? That's when that judgment will be made.
But again, one of the problems here that the Biden administration is facing is there's still this talk of, there needs to be some sort of a peace agreement between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Well, the U.S. has lost any leverage that they have in trying to negotiate or be a part of that when the troops left. And most U.S. troops are out. So the idea that there's going to be some peace agreement, it's pretty far-fetched at this point, Allison.
All right. Courtney, you summed it up pretty well. We may have until August 31st, but there's basically nothing left to do. Most of the withdrawal in Afghanistan now done. Courtney, Monica, thank you both. Haiti, now in a state of siege, a day after its president was assassinated. CCTV video showing heavily armed men and vehicles outside the president's home around the time of his murder. Police killed 4 suspected assailants in a wild shootout there late yesterday, taking 6 others into custody. Earlier today, at an emergency meeting, the United Nations Security Council unanimously called for calm in Haiti. NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuz joins me now from Washington, D.C. Dan, Haitian officials calling these attackers foreign mercenaries. What else have you learned about them in the last 24 hours? What do you know?
There are still a lot of questions, and it's still very unclear who was behind it, but there have been some developments. There have been more arrests of suspects, including, according to the Associated Press, 2 Haitian Americans, one of whom presented himself as a bodyguard at the Canadian Embassy previously. But as far as exactly what the motive was, who would have financed what looked like a pretty well-coordinated, well-planned, well-armed operation is still very unclear. And also, Haitian officials are saying they're still going after and searching for some of the suspects that are still at large.
Dan, President Moise said his government had disrupted a previous plot to assassinate him back in February. Do we have any more information on why he was targeted again right now? Was there something specific happening right now, or is this continued issue of wanting to remove him from office and the fact that he was trying to fill out his term?
The timing is still unclear, but what is true is that the country has been in tremendous turmoil. And Moise had many political opponents and critics, and he was accused of trying to cling to power and push the country into authoritarianism. And so he was becoming quite unpopular, and he was coming under a lot of criticism. And of course, it's also a country with tremendous gang violence and instability already.
Yeah.
But exactly, why this happened exactly when it did, we don't know.
Dan, Haiti's interim prime minister wants an internal investigation. The United Nations Security Council was briefed today. What else is the UN saying besides really calling for calm here and trying to keep the situation and the country as civilized as possible?
Well, you're right. The first request, the first appeal has been for calm so that there isn't more political instability or conflict. But a lot of the UN Security Council powers, government officials were saying, they wanted to see a clear idea about succession because that is also uncertain. The head of the Supreme Court should have been the successor to the slain president, but he died from COVID recently. And you have an interim prime minister. And just before the president was killed, he had appointed another person to become the new prime minister. So succession is an issue. The other thing that was discussed at the UN Security Council was exactly what kind of assistance the international community could provide to Haiti for an investigation into the assassination and also to their security services to bolster their national police.
So, Dan, you mentioned the international community. How about the U.S.? What does Haiti want us to do to try to assist them here as this political instability just gets worse?
Right. So Haiti, very close to the shores of the United States, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, and the U.S. has always been the largest donor to Haiti. And the Haiti government officials are saying to help them bolster their national police. And the ambassador to the United States from Haiti spoke to this. Let's hear what he had to say.
We want the United States to help us with the investigation by sending some experts on the ground to help the national police. And secondly, we requested from the United States to strengthen the national police system because the U.S. has been one of the greatest provider technical assistance for the national police. Therefore, we call on them to increase that assistance and to make sure that the national police doesn't face any lack of equipment, so they can be more effective in the fight against.
And that's the ambassador asking for help to strengthen the national police in Haiti. But that's a tricky question as well in such a volatile environment. It's not exactly clear specifically what the U.S. should be doing for the national police and whether the U.S. will want to send weapons there.
Dan, there is so much at play here. It's really just incredible. And I know, as you said off the top, there are still so many unanswered questions. I know we'll continue to stay in touch with you as you learn more. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You'll see a lot of empty seats at the Olympic Games later this month. Spectators now officially banned Tokyo entering a COVID state of emergency because of that surging Delta variant. NBC News senior national correspondent Tom Yamas has the latest from Tokyo.
We are following major headlines out of Tokyo today. The prime minister declaring a state of emergency surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. This happening just 2 weeks before the Olympic Games are set to begin. And now we're also learning the government saying they will not have any fans at the Olympic Games. The prime minister saying this is because there's been a small uptick in cases in Tokyo. But the bigger reason is because of the influx of foreign travelers, thousands of athletes, members of the press, coaches. They're really worried about the Delta variant, and they don't want an outbreak or even a super spreader event to happen during the Olympic Games here. So they've asked restaurants, bars, and karaoke parlors not to serve alcohol. They are really worried about crowd control. They don't want those areas to get congested. Now, when you speak to the Japanese people out on the street, it is hard to believe that they're having the Olympics here in Tokyo, and people in Tokyo are not excited about the games. A recent poll showed that more than 50% of the Japanese people wanted the games either canceled or postponed. That's not going to happen. It's just too late in the process. There's also very strict guidelines for the foreigners coming in. We right now are under a 14-day quarantine. Even the president of the IOC, the man responsible for all the Olympic Games, he just got to Tokyo. He also is under a quarantine. It just goes to show that how strict the rules are. And again, the major headlines today, Tokyo now under a state of emergency, and the Olympic Games, for the first time ever, will not have fans in the stands.
Let's go to NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hey, Simone, I see you got the yellow memo.
Yes, girl, I'm with you. All right, today we start in South Africa, where the nation's former president, Jacob Zuma, is turning himself in to begin serving a 15-month prison sentence for contempt of court. He defied a court order to testify before a judicial commission that was investigating widespread allegations of corruption during his time as president from 2009 to 2018. And in China, leading social media platform WeChat deleting dozens of LGBTQ accounts run by university students, saying some of them violated rules. Now, members of several LGBTQ groups telling Reuters that access to their accounts was blocked and all of their content was deleted, fueling concerns of a crackdown on gay content online in China. Now, WeChat did not immediately respond to a request for comment. And in Indiana, a police officer serving on an FBI task force was fatally shot on the job. According to the FBI, the suspect in the shooting was shot by another FBI agent and taken to a nearby hospital. Now, the officer who was killed, Detective Greg Ferenczi, served as a federal task force officer since 2010. And the deadly heat wave burning up the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada wouldn't be possible without human-caused climate change. That's according to a new study by an international team of 27 scientists. Their calculations, which have not been peer-reviewed yet, say that the affected areas were 150 times more likely to experience this extreme heat because of climate change. And this one might give you nightmares tonight. A search crews finding a 12-foot-long python in a Louisiana shopping mall. On Tuesday, Kara the python escaped from a local zoo that's inside the mall, and her escape forced the zoo to shut down for 2 days. Now, luckily, she isn't poisonous and didn't pose a threat to the public, but still pretty unnerving nonetheless.
Ooh. Simone, I love a good mall, I love a good zoo, but I don't think the two should mix. Case in point. Ugh.
That was my big question. Why is the zoo inside the mall? Why is that necessary?
Bad idea. We need to do some research here. Simone, thank you very much.
I felt the tears in my throat. I had a tremendous sympathy for the
The heartbreaking moment when the families in Surfside learned the search there had gone from rescue to recovery. At least 60 people confirmed dead so far in that condo collapse, dozens still missing. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joining me now from Surfside, Florida. Sam, it's now been 2 weeks since the collapse and we are in a recovery mission. What are you hearing from the families and the first responders there today?
Allison, good afternoon. Good to be with you. With respect to the first responders, look, this has been agonizing for them as well. They've been out there in these 12-hour shifts under blistering sun, trying to just find some remnants of loved ones here, or hopefully recover someone alive. Obviously, that so far has not materialized, and they say this is just an outlet for them as well. That powerful moment of silence that we saw last night in the 7 o'clock hour. First responders, family members, leaders here, all linked shoulder to shoulder in prayer. We talk about the fact that Surfside is such a faithful community of all different religions and backgrounds. You saw that on full display last night. It was really this sort of copacetic moment where everybody could come together, or I should say a cathartic moment, and really just release the pain that they've been holding on to. But for family members that I talked to, Allison, it is still exceedingly difficult. They say, I spoke with one woman whose mother, Judy Spiegel, is 65 years old, lives in that building. Her daughter, Rachel, told me, look, we can't just flip on a switch and suddenly we go from search and rescue to recovery efforts. We are deeply involved in this. We are still hoping that we're going to find her. And I can't just transition like that. We're going to continue doing the same things that we were doing. But psychologically, it is so difficult for them. So in every possible aspect right now, people who are out here are trying to process the information they've just received and certainly try to align that with reality. But they're also holding out hope.
Yeah. Such a difficult thing for them to do. So Sam, not to get too specific, but how big picture does this shift affect the search on the ground? Do things change? Are things different there today for those search crews, for those teams? Do they go about their job differently?
So here's what you need to know. There's two material changes that have happened. One is the sonar equipment that was being used. That's gone. And as far as the canines are concerned, now it's cadaver canines, not the dogs that were going out and trying to find sense of human life. So a little bit of a change there. As well, Allison, it's worth noting that we had, I think, about 36 bodies recovered within the first almost 2 weeks. Then within the last day and a half, it's been 24 bodies. The reason why there is greater accessibility, at least one of the reasons why, much greater accessibility in the debris field behind me now. Obviously, we had a portion of Champlain Tower South that was still standing. That has since been demolished. They have full accessibility to the debris field. What we have seen is they're continuing to do the exact same efforts, fine-tooth scrutinizing of that rubble for remains, certainly, and also for materials of loved ones. That is going on with the same delicacy and care that it was before, because their mission is the same in terms of trying to respect the families involved. It's just that now they don't believe there's any chance they're going to find anyone alive.
So, Sam, talking about this identification problem, right now, if I have the numbers correct, 35 of the 60 victims have been identified. Could you talk to us a little bit more about why it's taking so long to complete that process to let the families know?
Part of that, I think, is just notifying next of kin, Allison. And then there's also another element to this, which gets really into specificity that goes way beyond my pay grade. But sometimes when they recover portions of bodies, but it's not fully intact, there's a lot more DNA analysis that has to go in. Those remnants have to go to the coroner's office. And so there's more research that needs to be done. Those two things together are really part of the reason why we haven't seen everyone identified so far.
Easy to see there when you explain it, Sam, why it's such a difficult task. Experts are saying, Sam, that structural damage at the condo could have been repaired faster under a repealed law that requires condos planned for repairs. There is now a task force set to review Florida's condominium laws. What can you tell us there? I know as we try to understand what caused this, there are a lot of questions about what we can do to prevent these kinds of problems in the future.
Right. And there's still, obviously, as you said, the federal government and local task forces are trying to figure out what happened here. It's unlikely that it was one structural deficiency or one thing, but a confluence of factors. But to your earlier point about what's going on with Florida laws, if you're a family member right now, you have to be confounded by this. NBC News is reporting that in 2008, there was a law passed in the Florida legislature that requires condo associations to hire architects or structural engineers to go and figure out what the repairs are that need to be done every single 5 years and how much it's going to cost. That law, Allison, was repealed in 2010, and there was pushback on it under the guise, I guess, that it's too burdensome in terms of the work that's provided for property managers and for real estate folks. And the individual that sponsored legislation to repeal it is a real estate broker and a home builder. We reached out for him for comment. So far, have not heard back. But that's a law that was there for just a small period of time. There are 9 other states in the U.S. right now that have similar laws on their books at this moment.
Sam, it's one thing to say maybe it's too much work for someone, but to make it just go away entirely and not shift that burden to someone else, I can understand why families and folks living in Florida in high rises right now have a whole lot of questions. Thank you so much for reporting today. We always appreciate it. Angry, disgusted, and shocked, 8 of Bill Cosby's accusers speaking out now that his sexual assault conviction's been vacated. Here's NBC News senior national correspondent Kate Snow's exclusive, in-depth conversation with those women.
When they heard Bill Cosby would walk free, there was anger and more.
Sickened.
Disgusted. Stunned.
Distraught.
Nauseated. Victoria, who are you most angry at?
I'm angry at the legal system. We put our necks on the line, and then the legal system yanked the rug out from under us.
Not only was I angry, but I'm really sickened by the whole thing and disgusted.
The only way to stop a bully is to stand up to a bully. I'm feeling frustrated and upset because I feel like a bully has been let go.
I'm concerned for the victims of sexual assault that they will have that attitude of, why bother? Why bother telling my story?
I was drugged and raped.
6 years ago, all but one of these women joined a group of more than 20 to share their stories about Bill Cosby.
How many of you believe you were drugged by Bill Cosby? How many of you believe Bill Cosby raped you?
Their accusations ranging from harassment to groping to sexual assault and rape. Many of the stories were strikingly similar. Bill Cosby and his lawyers deny any of it ever happened.
We come on the air with breaking news. Bill Cosby has been released from prison.
Now the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision overturning Cosby's 2018 indecent assault conviction brings the women back together.
There's a fire inside of me that has just made me want to go out and make change even more than I did in 2015. So what am I going to do? Honestly, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do yet, because I'm still feeling those, 7 stages. I'm still feeling different emotions related to loss and confusion and being misunderstood and, pain and hurt and disgust and I need to process that. But once I do process that, I'm going to find a direction and then I'm going to start working on it.
He was not proclaimed innocent. I think those of us in our sisterhood need to hold on to that.
The point the Supreme Court made over and over was that this was a due process issue, that Bill Cosby was essentially promised by a prosecutor that he would never be prosecuted. And then he was, and that violated his rights.
And what is the evidence of that? What is the evidence of that promise?
Show the proof.
Bill Cosby's representative called the court's decision a victory for Black America.
This is not about race. It's about rape. The only place that race plays into this is the fact that Bill Cosby was disproportionately targeting Black women.
2 of these women testified in support of Andrea Constant.
Lisa Lott, do you regret that?
Absolutely not. I would go back and do it again. This man has spent 2 years and 9 months in jail. This man has lost his entire reputation. He's lost every bit of credibility that he's ever had.
It's worth the public knowing the magnitude of character assassination, of blaming and shaming, of silencing. And yet we've still found the strength to transform our tragedy into political power.
Since speaking out, many of Cosby's accusers have fought to change the statute of limitations on sexual assault and succeeded in several states.
This may be the kickstart that we need for more states to get involved.
Their survivor sisterhood, they say, the sweetest thing to come out of their trauma.
I am ready and raring to go and will do anything and speak my truth to anyone that needs it.
I'm very, very proud to know all of these women.
We have opened the floodgates for so many people who had previously never felt safe in speaking out. Predators are being put on notice. And we're discovering, I think, that probably the majority of women have experienced some kind of sexual harassment, sexual impropriety from someone they've either trusted or believed in, or society, the community their parents have cared about and believed and trusted.
And Kate joins me live now. Kate, these are 8 women with extraordinary stories, but they're just 8 women out of more than 60. How are they reaching out to other accusers to make sure all of their voices are heard?
Yeah, it's interesting, Allison. So a couple different things. One, they all have each other. They all know each other and talk online and, social media, have groups and that kind of thing for those who were accusers of Bill Cosby. But beyond that, they're also reaching out to other people who accuse other prominent celebrities. So, for example, the Harvey Weinstein case that is ongoing in California, the criminal case that's coming up in California, they've been reaching out to some of the Weinstein accusers and trying to work with them. You heard in the piece, Allison, they really want to do tangible things. They've been working very hard on changing statutes of limitation, changing state laws, even in California, I think changing some workplace regulations to try to make it easier to report sexual harassment and assault. So they're very proud of that work that they're doing. And as you heard, they want to redouble those efforts now.
Yeah, it seems they are certainly not backing down at all in spite of what's happened. Kate, there's still a civil case against Cosby in Los Angeles. What's the latest there? What should we know?
Yeah, so that's a whole separate case that was already ongoing before he got out of prison last week. It is a civil action, so it's completely separate from what happened in Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision does not affect that case. So what's happening is Gloria Allred, the prominent attorney, represents the woman who's making accusations against Bill Cosby in that civil action. She has asked the court, or said she's going to ask the court, for a second deposition from Bill Cosby. He already was deposed once. Their next court date is mid-August. Allison.
All right, Kate Snow, always great to see you.
You too.
It's time for the bottom line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. The Dow taking a hit today on concerns about the global economic comeback from COVID-19, Japan declaring a state of emergency in Tokyo, and the Dow is down today 259 points. Plus, the latest jobless claims are out, and they weren't as good as we had hoped. 373,000 Americans filed for first-time unemployment benefits last week, up a few thousand from the week before. CNBC correspondent Rahel Solomon's here to talk the markets and jobs today. So, Rahel, let's talk about the Dow first. Down around 260 points. It was actually an improvement. It looked much worse this morning. But what stocks and sectors took a hit today? And what are really the big worries today on Wall Street?
Well, Allison, it was pretty much just a down day with all 3 averages closing in negative territory, pretty much all of them hovering around negative 0.75%. So in addition to the Dow, which you just cited, the tech-heavy NASDAQ that closed down about 100 points, also well off its lows of the session. And the S&P 500, essentially the largest 500 public companies, also closed down about 0.75%. So, Allison, the stocks that were hit the hardest were those names that would typically benefit from the economy reopening, or the so-called reopening plays. So within the S&P, all 11 sectors finished in the red, with financials and the banks the worst performing group. Now, when we look at specific stocks or specific groups of stocks, shares of cruise lines, Carnival, Royal Caribbean were hit hard and finished down lower, as did Delta Airlines, again, those reopening stocks. But also the chip stocks, Micron, Nvidia, Qualcomm, Intel, Applied Materials also fell. Now, part of the concern here in the markets were those rising COVID cases. As you said, Allison, Japan announced that Tokyo is in a state of emergency as cases continue to rise there, meaning that there will be no spectators at the Olympics. We already knew that there were going to be no foreign spectators, but now no domestic spectators at all. Those Olympics set to start in just about 2 weeks. Some bright spots. Always try to give you some good news, Allison. Amazon, that finished in the green, also hit a new high, and Target also notched a new high. So it was overall a down day, but not nearly as bad as it was earlier in the session.
No, and you can't stop Amazon these days. Hey, look, you might not like what the markets did today, but when you look at what happened, it sure made a lot of sense. It was logical. If you're worried about the economy, those are the stocks that would be going down.
Right.
Rahel, let's talk jobless claims. And I don't want to be too doom and gloom here, because they weren't bad, but they did tick back up a bit to 373,000. So give us the good, the bad, and the ugly here. Who's hiring, who's firing, and what challenges are we still seeing as we try to get Americans back to work?
Okay, so yes, initial claims were higher than what economists were expecting, but as you said, not terrible. They were still roughly at pandemic lows. 373,000 Americans filing for unemployment insurance for the first time. higher than expectations, which called for 350,000 claims. And that figure was also unexpectedly higher than the previous week. It's a signal possibly that there's a slowdown in the labor picture amid the economic recovery. We'll speak a little bit about some of those reasons why. A few bright spots here, though, continuing claims. That's the number or the figure for those filing for at least 2 or more weeks. That number declined, although it does run a week behind initial claims. Allison, of course, as you know, we got the jobs report Friday for the month of June. That showed a better than expected 850,000 jobs added back. So I think we can call that the good. In terms of challenges, pick a challenge. There are so many for employers looking to hire. So for some workers, they cite legitimate health concerns. It is still a pandemic. Others cite childcare issues. We are in the summer, so hopefully we see more progress among the primary child caregiver in September when schools start to reopen. And then there have also been concerns that the enhanced unemployment, the federal benefit, incentivized people to stay home, especially those in lower wage jobs, and to collect the benefit, because there was some research that indicated a significant amount of people did actually make more with that enhanced, especially when it was $600 a week. That benefit, though, has been cut off in about half of states. Federal Reserve, though, saying that they do expect labor shortages to ease through the summer. So there's some good, there's some bad, a little bit of ugly. Yeah. But the Fed saying that they do expect some of that to ease through the summer.
Hey, we are working our way out of a recession, and it takes a while, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Rahel, thank you so much.
Surely. Sure.
Google dealing with another antitrust lawsuit over its mobile app store. 36 states claiming the company abuses its power over app developers. NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin here now. So, Ben, this is the 4th antitrust suit against Google in the past year alone. What specifically are these 36 states plus D.C. taking issue with?
Well, they've accused Google of running essentially a monopoly through its app store, the Google Play Store, leveraging its over 90% market share to force developers to use its services and then charge a 30% commission on top of every purchase, and then forcing those developers to raise prices on consumers. The complaint says Google faces no credible threats and market forces cannot exert pressure on its supra-competitive commissions. The suit is asking courts to enjoin, that means stop Google from its trade and monopolies. It might force them to change their business model, and it seeks redress for consumers. That could mean refunds for consumers using Google Play or even price reductions.
So what's Google saying about the suit?
Well, in a blog post, Google said the claims were meritless and said its platform provides openness and choice that others don't, and said it was strange, that's a quote, that state attorneys went after it instead of others. Later in their response, it mentioned the Apple Store has the most revenue. It's worth noting that Apple itself also charges 30% commissions in its app stores, 15% for small businesses. So maybe they're next.
How about those 3 other antitrust lawsuits against Google that we mentioned? What's the latest on those? What should we know?
Google is facing antitrust heat on several fronts. The DOJ in states allege it uses exclusionary contracts to force developers to make sure its apps are the default on Android phones. Republican attorneys have alleged that Google entered into an anti-competitive online advertisement agreement with Facebook. And a third lawsuit says that Google puts its own content and search boxes at the top of the search pages, and that pushes down results for other search companies like Yelp or TripAdvisor, reducing the traffic and hurting their business to the benefit of Google.
And look, it's not just in the U.S., right? In the EU, they're also investigating Google for antitrust allegations. What are the issues overseas?
Sure. In June, the EU announced it was investigating whether Google is favoring its own online display technology while also maintaining a presence in what is every stage of the supply chain of advertising, online advertising, everything from collecting data to selling advertising space and brokering data, giving it an advantage and making it harder for rivals to compete.
All right, Ben, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it. Purdue Pharma's controversial bankruptcy plan nearing final approval. 15 states now signing on to the $4.5 billion deal that would allow the OxyContin maker to reorganize into a new entity that helps fight the opioid epidemic. Its owners, the Sackler family, aren't admitting any wrongdoing under this deal. Jeff Mulvihill is a reporter with the Associated Press covering opioid litigation. He joins me now, and we're so thankful that he's here. Jeff, several of the states in this deal were against Purdue's original settlement proposal. So why are they on board now?
Well, the deal has changed slightly. It's improved. Purdue's owners, the Sackler family, the wealthy Sacklers we're familiar with, have agreed to put in another $50 million. They've accelerated some of the payments. And there's also a charity fund that will now be used to abate opioids. They've also agreed, and this is something that was very important to a number of the states, to increase disclosure on company documents.
So, Jeff, if approved, this deal protects the Sackler family from future litigation. A lot of people aren't happy about that. But what are you hearing from the family? What are they saying about this deal?
Sure. So the family has not said a ton. They put out a statement earlier today saying the resolution is an important step toward providing substantial resources for people and communities in need. And they hope that the funds will help achieve that goal. As you mentioned, Allison, the family has not apologized, which is something that upsets a lot of activists. It's something that Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson cited earlier today when he was explaining why he did not join the states that now support the deal.
Yeah, an apology may sound like a small thing given the kind of money we're talking about, but it could certainly go a long way. Jeff, you mentioned not everybody signed on. We've got 9 states and the District of Columbia who are not agreeing to this settlement. Do they need to, or can this still potentially go ahead without them?
It could go ahead without them. It's possible it would have gone ahead without as many as half the states. There's not some magic number, but certainly the states were an important group to get approval. All the other major groups involved in this have signed on. So that those attorneys general who were resisting were sort of the last major obstacle.
Jeff, this is the highest profile bankruptcy case linked to the opioid crisis. We're all very familiar with it, but it's not the only one. There are still trials against other manufacturers and distributors. Do you expect them to settle as well? What kind of a sense are you getting for how some of those other trials are going?
Sure. So we currently have 3 trials going on right now in West Virginia, California, and New York against various parties. I don't have a great handle on whether those will settle, although things can settle during trials. We do know that the big 3 drug distribution companies, plus Johnson & Johnson, have publicly indicated that they are interested in a global settlement. That has not happened yet, but it could happen.
All right. Jeff Mulvihill with the Associated Press. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Allison. Have a good day.
Dedicated campsites made up of ice fishing tents. Denver tackling homelessness with a twist. NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns is in Colorado.
Nobody wants to be in that position. I was the last person suspecting that. I just paid my rent, you know. And I live on Social Security, so I don't get that much. But I had a little place, you know, home.
What was it like to have that taken from you?
Difficult. But then I also realized I have to be a man and adapt and accept the facts that that's the way it is, and I have to get up and go do something about it.
Homelessness has many faces, many stories. This is Alan Bowes.
I was living in an apartment for 15 years, faithfully passed all my inspections, paid my rent on time, came home one night to a note on the door that said, order to quit, which means we had a certain amount of time to just pack up and leave.
And when did that happen?
November. 31 of us were misplaced.
November. So in the middle of the pandemic, you were left without a home?
Yes. The loophole was a month-to-month lease.
Alan lives in Denver. Like many cities across the country, it has a large population of people experiencing homelessness that has surged due to COVID-19.
We saw a 30% increase in
30%.
homelessness during the pandemic.
But with the crisis came a commitment to find new solutions. Denver Mayor Michael Hancock supporting an unlikely project. City-sanctioned campsites, deemed safe outdoor spaces, launching in December 2020.
You were a little skeptical at first. Why were you skeptical, and then what brought you around to now you guys are expanding this?
You know what? I go back to a time as a child growing up. At one point, my family experienced homelessness, and I just didn't find anything humane about encouraging folks to go outdoors. But it was looking at the model. It was one, the pandemic, and two, looking at the model that this collaborative of individuals and institutions built that showed me it would be a thoughtful, well-managed situation, and we had to give it a try. And it made a difference during the pandemic.
How different is this and what we're looking at here from what you'll see in other parts of the city?
So what we have here is what we call a managed site. So basically it's a clean, organized site that has access to trash, sanitation services. So this is totally different than the status quo.
Kawika Montoya works for Colorado Village Collaborative, the nonprofit behind the project.
It was inspired by my own journey out of homelessness. And instead of trying to bring services into unmanaged, unsanctioned camping across the city, we're actually making it a totally different model with staff, with all the service providers coming into one spot.
Clean, colorful rows of ice fishing tents provide shelter for all seasons.
We have housing navigation, we have employment navigation, we have an outreach doctor, an outreach nurse that comes in, we have mental health professionals. We also have organizations like the Denver Public Library who comes in and bring technology services to folks. They've recently provided all of our people with a phone with 1 year of service.
With limited space in traditional shelters, these safe outdoor spaces can be built quickly at low cost and provide people with a bed to call their own.
This is me. This is my home.
This newest site can house 40 people. Their other site can house 60, but with thousands still unsheltered, the goal is to expand into many more parts of Denver.
But not everyone has welcomed the new approach with open arms.
There was a lawsuit filed to stop this from happening.
Park Hill United Methodist Church volunteered their property as a site for the latest safe outdoor space in an affluent suburban neighborhood of Denver.
Most folks, when they're raising concerns, are about safety, that somehow having the site here makes it a less safe neighborhood or place to be.
So now that it's actually here, have people changed their minds? Have folks that have been hesitant come around?
There are folks that I think are going, oh, that's not what I expected it to be. It doesn't look like what I expected.
People like Jean McLaughlin Powers. We met her when she dropped by the site to see if she could donate water and snacks.
At first I was like, oh gosh, that's right around the corner. And then I was talking with some folks who actually have worked in the one down on Pearl, and they talked about the fact that there's not a problem, how well managed it is. It's gated, the people are vetted. I thought, well, gosh, I wonder if there's something I can do to help these guys.
The city has earmarked $900,000 so far for the current safe outdoor spaces. The average nightly cost is just $25 per person. But the ultimate goal is to get people out of outdoor shelters entirely.
If you're surviving every day on the streets, trying to just get your basic needs met, how are you ever able to focus on what that long-term solution looks like?
That respite meant everything to Alan.
What's getting you emotional?
Just dealing with it. Sorry. It'll all be good.
But I know it's not easy.
No. It takes a very strong person to be a homeless person. It's not an 8-hour job. They have to work at it 24/7.
He's in the process of applying for apartments and expects to leave this site within a few months.
You got to be able to shower, shave, you got to get out, you got to go do interviews, you got to meet with people. So just to have a focused center point to work from as you are doing your things, that is your hub, and then you can figure out from there, but you always know you got that hub to come home to.
You know where you're going to sleep every night.
You know where you're going to sleep.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel.
Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.